The gunshot echoed through the saloon as Zara Owens ducked behind an overturned table, her heart pounding against her ribs. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Her new start in Fort McDowell, Arizona Territory, 1883, had just become another nightmare. But Zara was no stranger to surviving nightmares. "Get out here, you thieving wench!" The drunken miner's voice slurred as he staggered between tables, pistol waving dangerously. "Nobody steals from Horace Blackley." "I didn't steal anything," Zara called out, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror gripping her chest. "Please, check your pockets again. Your money's probably still there." The saloon had emptied at the first shot, patrons and working girls fleeing into the dusty street. Only old Sam, the bartender, remained, his shotgun trained uncertainly on the miner. Zara had been cleaning tables, honest work she'd found just 3 days after arriving on the westbound stage. Liar. Another shot splintered the wood inches from her head. The batwing doors suddenly swung open. Boot steps, deliberate and unhurried, crossed the threshold. "That's enough, Blackley." The voice was deep, calm as still water, but with an edge sharp as a hunting knife. Zara peered around the table edge to see a tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. A cowboy, lean and broad-shouldered, his stance casual but alert. His face remained shadowed under his hat brim, but she could sense his eyes assessing the situation. "This ain't your business, McCoy," Blackley snarled, turning the gun toward the newcomer. "You're threatening an unarmed woman in a public establishment. I'd say that makes it everyone's business." The cowboy McCoy didn't reach for his holster, though Zara could see the revolver resting against his thigh. "Sam, that Blackley's 3rd drink today or his 13th, the bartender snorted. "Lost count after 10. "Check your vest pocket, Blackley," McCoy suggested. "The one on the left." The miner frowned, his free hand fumbling inside his filthy vest. His eyes widened when his fingers emerged clutching a wad of bills. "What did I tell you last time about accusing honest folks when you're too drunk to remember where you put your own money?" McCoy asked. Blackley's face flushed. For a moment, Zara feared he might shoot anyway, but then his shoulders slumped. "Didn't mean no harm," he muttered. "Apologize to the lady and Sam, then go sleep it off." After a mumbled apology, Blackley holstered his weapon and stumbled out. Zara slowly rose from behind the table, brushing dust from her simple dress. Her hands trembled despite her efforts to appear composed. "Thank you," she said to her rescuer, finally getting a clear look at him as he stepped further into the saloon. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a clear Arizona sky. His dark blonde hair curled slightly at his collar, and a thin scar traced his jawline. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Mason McCoy," he introduced himself. "Foreman at the Rocking K Ranch, Zara Owens." His eyes were kind but perceptive in a way that made her want to hide. She knew what he was seeing, a woman of 24 trying to appear unremarkable. Her brown hair was pulled back severely, her dress plain and high-necked despite the desert heat. She'd learned long ago that drawing attention only brought trouble. "You new in Fort McDowell?" Mason asked. "Arrived last week," she answered, not volunteering more. Sam set a glass of whiskey on the bar. "On the house, McCoy. Lord knows we need decent men like you in this town." Mason accepted the drink with a nod. "Just doing what anyone should." He glanced at Zara. "You all right, Miss Owens?" "Yes, I'm fine." She turned away, resuming her work wiping down tables, hoping he'd take the hint. His kindness was appreciated, but kindness from men often had conditions she wasn't willing to meet. Instead of leaving, Mason leaned against the bar, sipping his whiskey. "Sam told me he hired help. Says you work harder than any 2 people he's had before." Zara gave a slight nod, not looking up. I need the job. Most folks do. Not everyone does it well, though. Something in his tone made her pause. There was no flirtation, just simple observation. She'd become expert at detecting ulterior motives and surprisingly found none. Will Mr. Blackley cause more trouble? She asked, changing the subject. Mason shook his head. He's all bluster when drunk. Sober, he's just a tired old prospector chasing dreams that dried up years ago. The evening crowd began filtering in, and Zara returned to her duties. She felt Mason's gaze occasionally, but was grateful he didn't approach her again. By closing time, her feet ached, and the small of her back burned with fatigue. She collected her meager pay from Sam and wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Miss Owens, Mason's voice stopped her at the door. He'd returned sometime during the evening rush. It's late. Allow me to walk you to your lodgings. That's unnecessary, she answered quickly. Likely so, he agreed, but I'd rest easier. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Fort McDowell wasn't large, but the dark streets held dangers for a woman alone. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds their footsteps and distant coyote calls. Zara kept a careful distance between them. You don't need to fear me, Mason said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. I don't fear anyone in particular, Mr. McCoy, just a lifetime of experience. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted the admission. He nodded, accepting this without pressing. When they reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, he removed his hat. Good night, Miss Owens. Good night, Mr. McCoy, and thank you again. She watched him walk away before entering the building, unsure why she felt both relief and disappointment at his departure. The next morning, Zara woke before dawn, as was her habit. She dressed carefully, ensuring every button was fastened, every inch of scarred skin hidden. The boarding house was quiet as she made her way downstairs. Mrs. Holloway, a widow who ran the establishment with military precision, was already in the kitchen. Coffee's hot, she said by way of greeting. You're up with the roosters again. Old habits, Zara replied, pouring a cup. She liked Mrs. Holloway. The older woman asked few questions and minded her own business qualities Zara valued highly. That McCoy who walked you home last night? Mrs. Holloway asked, contradicting Zara's assessment of her discretion. Yes. There was trouble at the saloon, Mrs. Holloway nodded. He's a good sort. Doesn't drink to excess, pays his debts, treats women proper. Been foreman at the Rocking K for 5 years now. Zara made a non-committal sound. She hadn't asked for this information and didn't want it. Knowing people meant letting them know you, and that was a risk she couldn't afford. She arrived at the saloon early to help Sam with preparations for the day. The place looked different in morning light, shabby but honest. As she swept the floors, her mind wandered to Mason McCoy, despite her best efforts to think of nothing at all. At midday, the batwing doors swung open and Mason entered, removing his hat as he crossed to the bar. His appearance was no coincidence, Zara knew. Men like him didn't frequent saloons before evening unless they had purpose. Miss Owens, he greeted her with a slight bow. Sam said you might be willing to take on additional work. She paused, broom in hand. What kind of work? The housekeeper at the ranch left us without notice, married a silver prospector and headed to Nevada. He smiled slightly. We're short-handed and the place is falling into disarray. It would be 3 days a week, good pay. Zara hesitated. The extra money would help her save faster, but the ranch meant isolation with men she didn't know. As if sensing her concerns, Mason added, You'd be under Mrs. Fernandez's authority. She's our cook, been with the ranch 20 years. No one would trouble you. I'll consider it, she said finally. The offer stands. Ranch is 7 miles east. Anyone can direct you. He settled his hat back on his head. Hope to see you there, Miss Owens. For 3 days, Zara debated the offer while continuing her work at the saloon. The decision was made when a rowdy cattle buyer cornered her in the storeroom, his intentions clear. She'd fought him off with a broken bottle, and Sam had dismissed him from the establishment, but the incident left her shaken. The next morning, she packed her few belongings and paid Mrs. Holloway for the week. By noon, she was traveling east in a rented wagon, her worldly possessions in a single trunk. The driver, a leathery old man named Jenkins, kept up a steady monologue about local history, requiring little response from Zara. The rocking K sprawled across the landscape, larger than she'd imagined. A 2-story main house stood surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. In the distance, cattle grazed on scrubland that stretched to distant mountains. Jenkins deposited her at the main house with a cheerful wave before heading back to town. Zara stood with her trunk, suddenly uncertain when the front door opened. An elderly Mexican woman with shrewd eyes and silver-streaked black hair emerged onto the porch. "You must be Miss Owens." "I am Elena Fernandez." She inspected Zara with a penetrating gaze. "You are younger than I expected." "I'm 24, Mrs. Fernandez, and I work hard." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "That is what matters. Come, I will show you your room and duties." The room was small but private, located in a wing off the kitchen. It contained a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers, modest but far better than Zara had expected. The window overlooked a small kitchen garden, providing both light and privacy. "This will be fine," she told Mrs. Fernandez. "Thank you. Mr. Keller is away on business in Phoenix," the older woman explained as they toured the house. "Mr. McCoy manages everything in his absence. There are 12 ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse, but only Mr. McCoy and the foreman take meals in the main house." The house was large but not ostentatious. Zara's duties would include cleaning, laundry, and assisting Mrs. Fernandez with meal preparation when needed. The work was familiar. Zara had served in houses before, but the setting felt different somehow, less oppressive. She didn't see Mason until supper time. He entered the kitchen as she was helping Mrs. Fernandez serve, his expression brightening when he spotted her. "Miss Owens, you came." He smiled, and for a moment Zara found herself returning the gesture before remembering herself. "The arrangement seemed beneficial," she replied more formally. Mrs. Fernandez shooed them into the dining room, where 2 other men waited, Thomas Reed and Walter Cooper, the senior ranch hands who served as Mason's lieutenants. Both were cordial but too tired for much conversation. The meal passed pleasantly enough with talk of cattle, weather, and ranch business. After helping with cleanup, Zara retired to her room, exhausted but satisfied. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear. The days established a rhythm. Zara rose before dawn to help Mrs. Fernandez with breakfast. Mornings were spent cleaning and organizing the main house, afternoons dedicated to laundry or baking. By the end of her first week, she had transformed the neglected house into something approaching order. She saw Mason daily, usually at meals or when he came to discuss household matters with Mrs. Fernandez. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a respectful distance that Zara appreciated even as she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. One evening, she was hanging laundry in the yard when Mason approached leading a chestnut mare. "Miss Owens, I noticed you walk the property in the evenings. I thought you might enjoy riding instead." He patted the horse's neck. "This is Penny. She's gentle and patient, good for someone who might be out of practice." Zara hesitated, touching the horse's velvety nose. "It's been many years since I rode." "The offer stands whenever you're ready," he smiled. Sometimes seeing the land from horseback gives a different perspective. The next evening, after her chores were complete, Zara found Mason waiting with Penny saddled. "Just around the yard today," he suggested, "to get reacquainted." With his help, she mounted, the familiar motion returning to her body despite the years. Mason led Penny in a circle, then handed Zara the reins. "You remember more than you thought," he observed as she guided the horse confidently. "My father taught me when I was young," she admitted. "Before." She fell silent, and Mason didn't press. After a pleasant half-hour, he helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood too close before Zara stepped back, murmuring thanks. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She should have refused. Instead, she nodded. Their evening rides became routine. Each day, they ventured a little further from the ranch house, Mason pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land. Gradually, Zara found herself relaxing in his company, even sharing carefully edited details of her own life. "I was born in Missouri," she told him one evening as they rested their horses atop a small rise overlooking the ranch. "My father was a school teacher, and your mother died when I was 12, fever." Zara's hands tightened on the reins. "My father remarried 2 years later." Mason waited, sensing there was more. "My stepmother had a son from her previous marriage, Edward." Zara spoke the name like it tasted bitter. "He was not a good person." "I'm sorry," Mason said quietly. Zara shrugged, the gesture meant to appear casual, though it was anything but. "It was a long time ago." They rode in companionable silence back to the ranch. As Mason helped her dismount, his fingers brushed against her sleeve, pushing it slightly up her arm. She jerked away instinctively, but not before he glimpsed the pale scars that marred her skin. His expression changed not to disgust or pity as she'd feared, but to something harder to define. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping back immediately. "I didn't mean to pry." "You didn't," she replied, voice tight. "Good night, Mr. McCoy." She fled to her room, heart pounding. The scars were her shame, her secret physical reminders of weakness and pain she tried to leave behind. Now Mason had seen, and everything would change. It always did. The next morning, Zara rose even earlier than usual, determined to avoid him. She worked with fierce intensity, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing shelves that needed no attention. Mrs. Fernandez watched with knowing eyes but said nothing until Zara knocked over a container of flour in her haste. "Enough," the older woman said firmly. "Sit." Zara obeyed, hands trembling. Mrs. Fernandez poured coffee for them both. "When I came to this country, I was 16, she began, stirring sugar into her cup. "My husband was a good man, but his brother was not. For 3 years we lived in his house while saving money for our own. For 3 years I feared being alone with him." Zara looked up, startled by the personal confession. "We all carry scars, Nina. Some show on the skin, others on the heart." Mrs. Fernandez touched Zara's hand gently. "Mr. McCoy has seen more of life than his years suggest. He judges people by their actions, not their past." "You don't understand," Zara whispered. "Perhaps not everything, but enough." The older woman rose. "He rides to the north pasture today. He will return by sunset. The choice to avoid him is yours, but ask yourself what you are really afraid of." Zara avoided the question all day, burying herself in work. By late afternoon, she was exhausted but no closer to peace. She found herself in the kitchen garden, pulling weeds with unnecessary vigor when a shadow fell across her path. "Miss Owens." Mason's voice was hesitant, unlike his usual confidence. She stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. "Mr. McCoy, I've come to apologize. I made you uncomfortable yesterday, and that was never my intention." He kept a respectful distance. If you prefer, I find someone else to exercise Penny with you, or if you'd rather discontinue the rides altogether." "No," she interrupted, surprising herself. "That won't be necessary." Relief crossed his features. "I'm glad." They stood in awkward silence until Zara gathered her courage. "My stepbrother," she began haltingly. "After my father died, he wasn't a kind man." Mason's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to speak at her own pace. "The scars are from him, and from my stepmother, who never believed me when I told her what he did." Zara's voice was barely audible. "I escaped 5 years ago. I've been moving west ever since, staying nowhere long enough to be found. Is he looking for you?" "He was. I don't know if he still is." She met Mason's gaze directly. "I'm not ashamed of surviving, Mr. McCoy. But I've learned that people see damaged goods when they see these marks." For a long moment, Mason was silent. When he spoke, his voice carried a depth of emotion that made Zara's heart constrict. "Each mark tells me how strong you are, Miss Owens. Nothing more, nothing less." The simple statement, free of pity or judgment, loosened something long knotted inside her. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Would you still like to ride tomorrow evening?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would like that very much." He smiled, tipping his hat before turning to leave. That night, Zara slept deeply for the first time in years. Their rides continued through the summer months, gradually extending in duration as Zara's confidence grew. Mason taught her about the ranch operations, the cattle business, the challenges of wresting life from the Arizona wilderness. In return, she shared carefully chosen fragments of her past: her father's love of literature, her mother's skill with embroidery, her own dreams once upon a time of becoming a teacher. What she didn't share were the darkest memories: Edward's escalating cruelty after her father's death, the beatings that became something worse, the night she'd finally fought back and fled with nothing but the clothes on her back. Some burdens were still too heavy to voice. One scorching August afternoon, Zara was hanging laundry when a wagon approached the ranch, raising dust along the road. She squinted against the sun, recognizing Mrs. Holloway's nephew driving 2 passengers, a well-dressed man she didn't know and Mrs. Holloway herself. Mason emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he went to greet them. Zara continued her work, keeping an eye on the conversation. When Mason glanced her way with a troubled expression, unease prickled along her spine. "Miss Owens," he called, "would you join us, please?" She approached cautiously, noting Mrs. Holloway's apologetic expression. "This is Mr. James Hargrove," Mason introduced the stranger. "He's a private investigator from St. Louis." Zara's blood ran cold. "Miss Owens," Hargrove nodded, "or should I say Miss Lambert?" Her birth name, unspoken for 5 years, hit like a physical blow. "What do you want?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've been hired by your stepbrother, Edward Lambert, to locate you." Hargrove removed his hat. "He was quite concerned when you disappeared." "I'm sure he was," Zara replied, bitterness edging her words. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Zara. He came asking questions in town, showed me a photograph. I couldn't lie not to an official investigator." Mason's expression had hardened. "What exactly is your business with Miss Owens, Mr. Hargrove?" "Simply to inform her that her stepbrother wishes to reconcile. He's quite remorseful about past disagreements and wants to make amends." "Disagreements?" Zara's laugh held no humor. "Is that what he calls it?" Hargrove looked uncomfortable. "Family matters are complex. Regardless, I'm authorized to offer you transportation back to Missouri at his expense. And if I refuse, that is your right. I merely deliver the message." He held out an envelope. "He asked me to give you this." Zara made no move to take it. After an awkward moment, Mason accepted it instead. "You've delivered your message," Mason said firmly. "Mrs. Holloway, we thank you for your assistance. Mr. Hargrove, I believe your business here is concluded." The investigator hesitated, then nodded. "Very well." "Miss Lambert, should you change your mind, she won't," Mason interrupted. After they departed, Zara stood frozen, fear washing through her in waves. Mason gently guided her to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. "He found me," she whispered. "After all this time. What do you want to do?" Mason asked. She looked up, surprised by the question. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. "I don't know." She stared at the envelope Mason still held. "What does it say?" "I haven't opened it. It's addressed to you." With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in a familiar hand that made her stomach clench. "Dearest Zara," she read aloud, voice flat. "I pray this finds you well. The years since your departure have been ones of reflection and regret for me. Mother passed last winter, her final wish that our family be reunited. I have changed, sister. The anger that once ruled me has been tempered by time and consequence. I ask only for the opportunity to make amends. The family estate is yours by right as much as mine. Please come home." The letter was signed simply, "Edward." "You believe him?" Mason asked. Zara folded the letter carefully. "No, Edward never changes. He only adapts his strategies." "Then you won't go." "If I stay, he'll come himself, now that he knows where I am." She looked at Mason, fear evident in her eyes. "I need to leave tonight." "Running hasn't solved anything in 5 years," Mason pointed out gently. "Perhaps it's time to stand your ground. You don't know him." "No, but I know you." He touched her hand lightly. "You're stronger than you believe." Zara withdrew her hand, rising from the bench. "I'll pack my things." Mason didn't try to stop her, which somehow hurt more than if he had argued. By evening, her trunk was packed, and arrangements made to travel on the morning stage. Mrs. Fernandez prepared a special dinner, her disapproval of Zara's departure evident in her silence. Mason didn't join them for the meal. When Zara finally saw him, he was sitting alone on the porch, staring into the darkness. "I wanted to thank you," she said, stepping outside, "for everything." He nodded without looking at her. "Where will you go? California, perhaps, or Oregon?" "Somewhere he won't think to look immediately. And then another place and another after that." His voice held no judgment, only sadness. "Always looking over your shoulder, never allowing yourself to belong anywhere." Zara's throat tightened. "I don't have a choice. We always have choices." He stood, finally turning to face her. "Stay, Zara. Not just at the ranch, though God knows I wish you would, but in this territory. Build a life that's yours, not defined by running from him." "He'll hurt anyone who stands in his way," she whispered. "I can't risk that. I can't risk you." The admission hung between them, charged with meaning neither had voiced before. Mason stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "Some things are worth the risk." Before she could respond, he gently took her hand, turning it palm up. With deliberate care, he pushed her sleeve back, exposing the network of scars that crisscrossed her forearm. Then he did something no one had ever done. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to the largest scar, a pale ridge that ran from wrist to elbow. "Each mark tells me how strong you are," he murmured against her skin. "How brave, how worthy of a life that isn't spent in fear." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as years of shame began to crack and fall away. When Mason straightened, she saw his own eyes were damp. "I can't promise he won't come," Mason said, "but I can promise you won't face him alone. Not ever again." In the stillness of the desert night, Zara made her choice. She stepped forward into Mason's embrace, allowing herself to be held for the first time in longer than she could remember. His arms encircled her gently, offering protection without confinement. "I'll stay," she whispered against his chest. But I'm afraid. Fear isn't weakness, he told her. It's just the price of having something worth losing. They stood together until the night air cooled, holding the promise of dawn. Zara unpacked her trunk the next morning, each item returned to drawers and shelves feeling like a declaration. She was choosing to stay, choosing to build rather than flee. The fear remained, but alongside it grew something unfamiliar, a tentative hope. Life at the ranch continued. Zara's responsibilities expanded as Mrs. Fernandez taught her to manage household accounts and supervise occasional hired help for large projects. Mason included her in discussions about ranch operations, valuing her practical suggestions and quick mind. Their relationship evolved cautiously. Evening rides continued, now often concluding with them sitting together on the porch, talking long into the night. Sometimes Mason read aloud from books in Mr. Keller's library, his voice bringing stories to life as Zara mended linens beside him. The first time he kissed her was on a crisp October evening. They had ridden to a mesa overlooking the valley, watching sunset paint the landscape in fire and gold. The moment was so perfect it almost hurt. "I'm falling in love with you, Zara Owens," Mason said simply. "I thought you should know." She turned to him, wonder and fear warring in her expression. "I don't know if I remember how to love without fear. Then we'll learn together." He touched her cheek gently. "May I kiss you?" The question the choice offered meant everything. She nodded, and his lips met hers with tender restraint, a promise rather than a demand. When they returned to the ranch, something had shifted between them. Mrs. Fernandez noted their clasped hands with a satisfied nod, but said nothing. 2 weeks later, Mr. Keller returned from his extended business trip. Zara had heard much about the ranch owner but had never met him. Joseph Keller proved to be a hearty man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a booming laugh. He approved of the improvements to the house and, more importantly, of Mason's obvious affection for Zara. "About time," he told Mason over dinner. "Been wondering when you'd find someone worth settling down with." Mason smiled, his eyes meeting Zara's across the table. "Had to wait for the right person." As autumn deepened toward winter, Zara allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness. The nightmares that had plagued her for years became less frequent. She began to make friends in Fort McDowell during trips to town, no longer hiding behind anonymity. Only occasionally did the shadow of Edward Lambert darken her thoughts. Each day without word from him made it easier to hope he had abandoned his search. Perhaps Mrs. Holloway had been wrong about the investigator's identity. Perhaps his letter had been genuine after all. These hopeful thoughts shattered one December morning when a telegram arrived for Mason. Zara watched his expression harden as he read it. "What is it?" she asked, dread coiling in her stomach. "Edward Lambert arrived in Phoenix yesterday. He's asking about you." Mason folded the telegram carefully. "Our friend Sheriff Brooks sent warning." Fear, familiar as an old scar, throbbed to life. "He's coming here." "Yes," Mason's voice was calm, his eyes steady on hers. "But you're not alone this time." That evening, Mason gathered the ranch hands. Without revealing details, he explained that Zara was being pursued by someone who wished her harm. To a man, they pledged protection, many having grown fond of the quiet woman who ensured their comfort. "No one approaches the main house without identification," Mason instructed. "Anyone suspicious is to be reported immediately." Thomas Reid, the senior hand who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. "Miss Owens saved my Miller's life last month when the fever took hold," he said, referring to his young daughter in town. "Any man comes meaning her harm will answer to all of us." Zara was humbled by their loyalty. Still, as days passed with no sign of Edward, anxiety gnawed at her. She found herself startling at sounds, checking windows, sleeping poorly. Mason noticed. One evening, he found her in the kitchen long after everyone else had retired, kneading bread dough with unnecessary force. "You haven't been sleeping," he observed, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm fine." "Zara." His gentle persistence broke through her pretense. "Talk to me." Her hands stilled in the dough. "What if he hurts someone? What if he hurts you? I couldn't bear it." Mason crossed to her, gently turning her to face him. "Look at me," he requested. When she did, he continued, "I've faced angry bulls, flash floods, and men who would kill for $1. I can handle Edward Lambert. You don't know what he's capable of. Neither does he know what I'm capable of protecting what I love." Mason's words were soft but carried absolute conviction. Zara's breath caught. "What you love?" "Yes." His smile was tender. "I love you, Zara Owens. Not despite your scars, but with them, because they're part of what made you the woman standing before me." No one had said those words to her since her father died. She hadn't believed she would ever hear them again, much less trust them. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and freeing. Mason drew her close, and in his arms, Zara found what had been missing for so long: the feeling of safety, of home. The confrontation, when it came, arrived not with dramatic violence, but on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Zara was in the parlor arranging Christmas greenery when the sound of approaching horses drew her to the window. A smart buggy pulled by two matched bays was coming up the drive, a single passenger visible. Even at a distance, she recognized Edward. Mason was at the corrals, too far to reach quickly. Mrs. Fernandez had gone to town with Mr. Keller. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then, remembering Mason's words, Zara straightened her shoulders and moved to the door. She would not hide. Not anymore. Edward Lambert had aged in the 5 years since she'd seen him. His once handsome face had thickened, lines of dissipation etching around his mouth. His clothes were expensively tailored, but showed signs of where that suggested diminished circumstances. He smiled when he saw her on the porch, the familiar expression sending ice through her veins. "Little sister, how well you look. What do you want, Edward?" Zara's voice was steadier than she'd expected. "Is that any way to greet family after I've traveled so far?" He ascended the porch steps with the entitled confidence she remembered all too well. "Won't you invite me in?" "No, say what you came to say." His smile thinned. "Very well. I've come to bring you home, of course. Mother's estate needs settling, and as I wrote, half is rightfully yours. We both know there's no inheritance. Your gambling would have seen to that years ago." Anger flashed in his eyes before he controlled it. "Perhaps I simply miss my sister." "Is that so difficult to believe? We were close once. We were never close. You made my life a living hell from the moment your mother married my father." Edward sighed dramatically. "The past is past, Zara. I've changed. Found God, if you must know." "Found debt collectors, more likely," she countered, seeing the truth in his momentary flinch. "How much do you need this time, Edward? How desperate are you to have tracked me this far?" His facade cracked. "You ungrateful little," he caught himself. "You owe me. After everything I provided, after taking you in when your father died, taking me in." Zara's laugh held no humor. "Is that what you call what you did to me?" Movement caught her eye. Mason approaching from the corrals, his stride purposeful. Relief washed through her, but she kept her eyes on Edward. "You need to leave," she told him. "There's nothing for you here." Edward followed her gaze, turning to see Mason's approach. "Ah, I see you found protection. A ranch hand, how quaint." "Foreman," Mason corrected, stepping onto the porch. "And you must be Edward Lambert. You weren't expected. Family doesn't require invitations." Edward extended his hand, which Mason ignored. Miss Owens has made it clear your presence is unwelcome. I suggest you return to town." Edward's expression hardened. "This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when you trespass on Rocking K property and harass one of our people." Mason's tone remained even, but Zara saw the tension in his stance. "One of your people," Edward laughed coldly. "Is that what she told you she is? Did she mention she's a runaway, that she stole from her family, that she's unstable? She told me everything I need to know about you." Mason moved slightly, positioning himself between Zara and Edward. "Now, for the last time, leave." Edward's hand moved to his coat, and Zara's heart stopped. Mason, but Edward withdrew only a folded document. "A court order," he announced smugly, "declaring my sister incompetent to manage her affairs and placing her in my guardianship. The law is on my side, Cowboy." Mason didn't take the paper. "Arizona territory isn't Missouri. That order has no jurisdiction here." "Perhaps not yet, but I've spoken with the territorial judge in Phoenix. Once he reviews the case, he'll review these as well." Mason produced a packet of letters from his pocket. "Testimonials from respected citizens of Fort McDowell regarding Miss Owens' character and competence. Statements from the sheriff about your inquiries into her whereabouts that struck him as suspicious. And most interestingly, correspondence from your creditors in St. Louis, several of whom were quite informative about your financial desperation." Edward's face drained of color. "You've been investigating me, protecting what's mine," Mason replied simply, "just as you claim to be doing." For a moment, Zara thought Edward might attack. Instead, he gave a harsh laugh. "You have no idea what she is, what she's done." "I know exactly who she is," Mason replied. "A survivor, a woman of extraordinary strength who deserved far better than the family she was born to." Edward's eyes narrowed. "She'll ruin you too, eventually." "It's her nature." "You've had your say," Mason's voice hardened. "Now go. Don't return to Fort McDowell and don't attempt to contact Miss Owens again. Next time the welcome won't be so cordial." As if to emphasize his point, several ranch hands appeared at strategic locations around the yard, Thomas Reed among them, rifles casually visible. Edward glanced around, assessing the situation. Whatever he saw convinced him to retreat, though his parting smile promised this wasn't over. "We're family, Zara. That doesn't change no matter how far you run." After he'd gone, Zara released the breath she'd been holding. "He'll try again," Mason nodded. "Probably, but he's a coward at heart. Men like him prefer easy targets." "Thank you," she said simply, "for standing with me." "Always." He touched her cheek gently. "You faced him, Zara. You didn't run." The realization struck her with surprising force. She hadn't run. For the first time, she'd confronted her tormentor without fleeing. That night, sleep eluded Zara. She paced her small room, Edward's voice echoing in her mind. Despite Mason's confidence, she feared what Edward might do next. He had never accepted defeat gracefully. Unable to settle, she left her room, intending to make tea in the kitchen. As she passed through the darkened house, a soft light from the study caught her attention. She found Mason at Mr. Keller's desk, writing by lamplight. He looked up at her entrance. "Couldn't sleep," she shook her head. "What are you doing, writing to Judge Franklin in Phoenix?" "He's an old friend of Mr. Keller's." Mason set down his pen. "Edward's claims won't stand legal scrutiny, but it's best to be prepared." Zara leaned against the doorframe, suddenly overwhelmed by his steadfast support. "Why are you doing all this for me? You know why." His eyes held hers in the lamplight. "I meant what I said earlier. I love you, Zara. I want a future with you if that's what you want too. Even with all this complication, all this danger, life is complicated and dangerous. Loving someone doesn't change that." He rose, crossing to her. "It just means facing it together." As simply as that, Zara's decision was made. She reached for him and Mason gathered her close, his embrace both protection and promise. "Marry me," he whispered against her hair. "Not because of Edward or fear or needing protection. Marry me because we deserve happiness together." Zara pulled back enough to see his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his expression. "Yes," she answered, her voice breaking on the single syllable. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss they shared sealed more than a promise. It marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They were married 2 weeks later in Fort McDowell's small church. Mr. Keller gave Zara away, beaming like a proud father. Mrs. Fernandez wept openly, while Thomas Reed and the other ranch hands formed an honor guard outside the church. Judge Franklin, summoned from Phoenix, performed the ceremony, and afterward presented Zara with legal papers declaring Edward Lambert's guardianship claims invalid in Arizona territory. It wasn't a permanent solution. Edward could petition again, but it provided security for now. "A wedding gift," the judge explained. "Mason spoke highly of your resilience, Mrs. McCoy." Mrs. McCoy. The name felt strange and wonderful. Mason surprised her with a wedding gift of his own deed to a small parcel of land bordering the rocking quay, with a sturdy cabin overlooking a creek. "Mr. Keller is selling me 40 acres, he explained as they rode out to see it the day after their wedding. "It's not much, but it's a start. Our own ranch someday, if that's what you want. Or we can stay on at the rocking quay as long as you like." The cabin was simple but solidly built. Previous occupants had planted cottonwood trees that now provided shade and an apple orchard just coming into maturity. "It's perfect," Zara told him, meaning it. "Our home." That night, in the privacy of the cabin, Mason showed Zara a different kind of healing. With infinite patience, he helped her overcome the fears that intimacy had always triggered. Each scar on her body he honored with gentle attention, transforming marks of pain into testaments of survival. "Each mark tells me how strong you are," he repeated, his words a benediction against her skin. "How brave, how worthy of love." For the first time in her adult life, Zara felt her body not as a source of shame or a target for abuse, but as something precious and whole despite its scars. In Mason's loving care, she discovered pleasure where there had only been pain, trust where there had been fear. They moved into the cabin permanently in the spring, though Mason continued his duties as foreman at the rocking quay. Zara transformed the neglected gardens into productive plots, planted flowers, and created a home that reflected her emerging sense of self. Mrs. Fernandez visited often, teaching Zara to cook traditional Mexican dishes and offering the maternal guidance she'd long missed. Mr. Keller became a frequent dinner guest, delighting in their happiness as if it were his own. The threat of Edward receded as months passed with no further contact. Sheriff Brooks reported that Edward had returned east after an unsuccessful meeting with the territorial officials in Phoenix. While Zara remained cautious, the constant fear diminished, allowing space for joy to grow. In early autumn, Zara confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks: she was expecting their first child. Mason's reaction, stunned joy followed by tender concern, reassured her that parenthood with him would be nothing like her own experience of family. "I'm afraid," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, Mason's hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "What if I don't know how to be a good mother? What if the things Edward did to me, the person he tried to make me become, what if that's still inside me?" Mason considered her words seriously. "We're all shaped by our past, but we aren't defined by it. You've shown that every day since I've known you." He kissed her forehead. "Besides, we'll learn together. I don't exactly have a perfect model to follow either." His confidence bolstered her own. As her body changed, Zara found herself marveling at its capacity for creation after enduring so much destruction. The child growing within her represented everything Edward had tried to take: future, hope, family. Winter brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. Zara and Mason spent evenings planning for the baby, reading together before the fire, building a life neither had dared imagine possible. On a bitter March night, their son arrived after a difficult labor. Mason refused to leave Zara's side despite Mrs. Fernandez's protests that men didn't belong in birthing rooms. His steady presence anchored her through pain that threatened to overwhelm. When she finally held their child perfect, despite the struggle to bring him into the world, Zara understood something profound about her own scars. They marked not just survival but the capacity to create something beautiful from pain. "Thomas Joseph McCoy," she murmured, honoring both their loyal friend and Mr. Keller. "Our beginning." Mason's eyes shone with emotion as he gently touched their son's tiny hand. "He's magnificent, like his mother." As spring returned to the Arizona territory, Zara often sat with Thomas in the garden, watching wildflowers bloom where once there had been only dust. Mason would find them there after work, the three of them forming a tableau of contentment that once would have seemed impossible. One warm evening, as Thomas slept peacefully in his cradle, Mason and Zara walked to the ridge overlooking their land. The setting sun painted the landscape gold, transforming ordinary rocks and scrub into something magical. "You ever think about what might have happened if I'd left that day?" Zara asked, leaning into his side. "If I'd taken the stage as planned," Mason considered the question. "Sometimes I like to think I would have followed you, not to force you back, but to offer you a choice." "I made the right one," she said with certainty. "Staying was the first time I chose my future instead of running from my past." He kissed her, still with the same reverence as their first embrace. "I thank God for your courage every day." A letter arrived later that month from St. Louis. Zara recognized the handwriting immediately and nearly burned it unopened. Only Mason's gentle reasoning persuaded her to read Edward's words. The news was unexpected. Edward had fallen ill with pneumonia after returning east. During his convalescence, he'd had time to reflect. The letter contained something Zara had never expected to receive: an apology. "I do not ask forgiveness," Edward had written. "What I did to you is beyond that, but I want you to know that I recognize the wrong I've done. The doctors say my condition is worsening. I likely will not see another winter. It brings me some peace to know that you have found happiness despite my cruelty." Zara read the letter multiple times, searching for the manipulation she'd always associated with her stepbrother. Finding none, she was left with uncertainty. "Do you believe him?" Mason asked, echoing the question she'd once asked about Edward's previous letter. "I don't know," she admitted, "but it doesn't matter anymore. He has no power over me, over us." She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not discarded but no longer central to her story. Whether Edward's contrition was genuine or another deception, Zara had moved beyond his reach. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, their home expanded to accommodate his energy. Mason built additions to the cabin, while Zara established a small school in town, teaching 3 days a week while Mrs. Fernandez watched Thomas. Her father's love of education lived on through her work with the children of Fort McDowell. Mr. Keller, aging but still vigorous, became Grandpa Joe to Thomas, spoiling the boy shamelessly. When he announced his intention to retire to California, his offer to Mason was generous partnership in the Rocking K, with option to buy his share over time. "It's more than I dreamed possible," Mason told Zara as they discussed the proposition. "But it means staying here, committing to this land for good. Is that what you want? Zara looked around at the home they'd built, not just the physical structure but the life it contained. This is where I found myself, she said simply. Where I stopped being afraid. Yes, it's exactly what I want. 2 years after Thomas's birth, their family expanded again with the arrival of twin daughters Alina and Sarah. The deliveries were easier this time, Zara's body remembering its strength rather than its trauma. As their children grew, Zara and Mason never hid the truth of her past, sharing age-appropriate versions when questions arose about her scars or her family. They taught their children that strength came in many forms, and that survival itself was an act of courage. News eventually reached them of Edward's death peaceful, according to the letter from his attorney. He had left his modest remaining estate to Zara, an inadequate reparation for wrongs that can never be truly remedied. After discussion, Zara and Mason used the inheritance to establish a fund for women and children seeking safety from abusive situations, turning Edward's final gesture into something healing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason presented Zara with a locket containing miniature portraits of their children. Inside the lid, he had inscribed, "Each mark tells your story of strength." Zara touched the scars on her arm, faded now to silvery lines that no longer dominated her self-image. "I haven't been afraid in a very long time," she realized aloud. Mason smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with the expression. "That's the greatest gift, isn't it? Living without fear." "No," Zara corrected gently. "The greatest gift was finding someone who saw beyond the scars to the person beneath. Who believed I was worth fighting for when I'd forgotten how." As twilight settled over their home, they sat together on the porch swing, watching their children chase fireflies in the yard. Thomas, now 9 and lanky like his father, helped the 5-year-old twins with their mason jars, his patience remarkable for his age. "We did well," Mason observed, his arm around Zara's shoulders. "We did." She leaned into him, savoring the security of his embrace. "Better than I ever dared hope." In the distance, the sunset painted the Arizona sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Another day ending, another beginning promised with dawn. For Zara McCoy, once defined by scars and fear, now surrounded by love and purpose, it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.